Building a QuickBooks-style database for music using Microsoft Excel, this time constructing the mode numbers, which are the relative perspective engine within our database. So get ready and some coffee because we're about to excel at automating Excel. Here we are in Excel. If you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay because we basically built this from a blank worksheet but started in a prior presentation. So if you want to build this entire worksheet from a blank sheet, you could begin back there or just construct the part of the table that we're currently working on. If you do have access to this workbook though, 4 tabs down below: example, accounting, practice, blank, example tab, in essence the answer key, the end result, the cheat sheet. The accounting tab being the accounting system that we will use as an analogous system, comparing and contrasting as we work through our related music system. The practice tab having pre-formatted cells so you can practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting. But if you don't have any of that, that's okay because we continue our work on the blank tab, where we started from a blank worksheet and will continue in essence in the blank part of the worksheet, practicing not only our table visualizations, our music construction, but also our Excel formatting skills. Let's go on over to the example tab to get an idea of what we will be building this time. So last time we've done our count numbers and our music letters and then music numbers, which we said are analogous to our accounting system of the account names and account numbers. Now we're going to do something that's possibly the most different feeling from the accounting system, but it's analogous to basically the closing process within the accounting system. And I'm going to compare it then to the account types that we have in our accounting system. And the account types are going to give our accounting system the idea of, are they assets, liabilities, equity, and expense? And that could encode whether they're going to be temporary accounts or permanent accounts. So from an accounting perspective, what does that do? That means that when we get to the trial balance over here, the temporary accounts will be adjusted as we adjust our date range. So if this was 1/1 and I'm just looking at 10 days of data, this will be the closing process. So now we have these temporary accounts that are being closed out on 1/6, let's say. Most of it has now closed out to revenue. I still add up to 0 debits minus the credits if I look at it from a trial balance. That's similar to having a different perspective. Same data, at least in total, being represented, but we have a different kind of perspective based on how much of that data is being closed out into the revenue cycle. Now, as we do this, I would think about our table visualizations that we are constructing with 3 main kind of filter or different options for sorting the data. One is just sorting the data, like sorting by account number or sorting by alphabetical order. Another is filtering data, removing data from the system so we have less data, like for example, taking this report and sorting it by department, let's say. And the next one would be something like the closing process, meaning I have the same total data in terms of dollar amount, but I have reformatted the perspective to close out the temporary accounts to the permanent accounts. So that's going to be the 3 kind of ways we want to think of it. If I look at the music system, we have a similar kind of issue here where if I look at the end result that we're going to have like a trial balance, the x-axis is on time, the y-axis is notes, octaves, which could be encoded also into our MIDI notes. And so we could imagine this as a trial balance report similarly, in that we could imagine reports that are going to be generated from it, consolidating data, like consolidating multiple timestamps into one. Or we can think about a report that we can generate from it that would be filtering data, like getting data on one particular timestamp or something like that. And then this one that's analogous to us closing out the books is this relative perspective. So in the music system, we're going to have these 7 notes from a relative perspective. And if I keep the number system the same, then we have 12 7-note collections, which are all analogous. So why is that the third type of report? Because if I change this from 4 o'clock, well, this will all make more sense once we do this a little bit more in depth and build this out later. But if I change this to 6 o'clock, notice that the Ionian's now at a D. I have the same numbers here, but these numbers have changed relative. If I change it back to 4 o'clock, now the Ionian's on the C. So we're going to end up having this kind of engine that will give us the same relative numbering system, 1 through 7 being in the collection. The 0.5 numbers, which there'll be 5 of, will be outside of the collection, giving us a relative perspective, providing us 12 different collections of 7 notes plus the 5-note relative perspective. So that is actually the easiest way for most people, whether musicians or not, to visualize the data, because now no matter what collection of notes I'm looking at, I can apply the same numbering system that gives the same functionality from the perspective of those collections of notes. So what's the engine that we can use to drive that? We have a numbering system, and if we applied the formula that is normally used to pick a 7-note collection out of the 12-note collection, it would be whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, typically from the perspective of the Ionian. So that would mean the Ionian would be the 1, and then whole step to the Dorian is going to be 2, whole step to the Phrygian is 3, half step to the Lydian is 4, whole step to the Mixolydian is 5, whole step to the Aeolian is 6, whole step to the Locrian is 7. Now then I'm going to apply the half steps in there. 1.5 I'm going to call Ionian Ocean or I sharp. 2.5 Dorian Ocean or Dorian sharp. There's no Phrygian Ocean because that's where the half step is. You can imagine the piano here. If we're in the key of C, these would be the white notes on the key of C. And then we have Lydian Ocean 4.5, Mixolydian Ocean 5.5 or Mixolydian sharp, and Aeolian Ocean 6.5. Now, the thing that's a little bit different here is if I change this to 6 o'clock, that's the engine works because now these have stayed the same, but now the D is the Ionian because the 6th note in the musical alphabet is a D. So that allows me to look at everything from this perspective. That allows me to change the numbers over here. So now the Ionian is the D, and so I have the same notes but a different relative perspective. Now, that's going to be the idea. That becomes a little bit messy because on the piano, you don't have that capacity so much due to the fingering being different, due to the key structures not all being the same size. All right, but theoretically, and any instrument other than the piano, and including the piano, it would be useful to look at things from this relative perspective. So that's how we'll construct it. So I'm going to go back on over to the blank tab, and we'll just construct basically that engine. So I'm going to make the F small, and I'm going to then just build this out I could give it a name. This will be, I'll call it mode number. I'm going to try to build it in like a vertical fashion. And then we have mode letter. I'll just say LET. It's going to make it longer than it needs to be. Let's just say mode number, letter, and then note, letter, and then note number. So the headers get a little bit messy because we're trying to keep them short. I'm going to go to the Home tab, Font Group, hit the drop down, make it black, and then the font will be white. I'm going to go to the Alignment group and center it. Okay, so remember, if I was to apply the formula and then number it, and I have a 7-note collection, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, the notes in the collection could just have a numbering system of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? The notes outside the collection, though, there's going to be some notes outside the collection between, and these would be the black notes from the perspective of C on the piano. However, from the perspective of any other starting point, The black notes are all messed up, right? So I know that there's going to be a whole step between 1 and 2. So that I'm going to give me some space there. I'm going to call that 1.5. Let's add some decimals. Select this whole thing. Home tab, number group, add a decimal. I only need 1. And then the Dorian. So it's another whole step from Dorian. So I need another 2.5. 2.5. And that gets me to the Phrygian. And then there is no step between 3 and 4. So that's Phrygian and Lydian. There is another whole step between Lydian and Mixolydian. So I'm going to call that 4.5. And then I have Mixolydian. There's a whole step. So there's got to be a note in between. 5.5, Mixolydian Ocean, and then Aeolian. And Aeolian has one. It's going to be 6.5. And then once I get to 7, it'll start over again because there's a half step that goes back to, in essence, 1. So as we do this, just like with the numbering system, we do have octaves. So I'm thinking right here that we're only going to go 1 octave and think about it as wrapping around in a circle. But the real shape, as we always want to think about, is that whether we're thinking nodal points, relative perspective, or absolute node numbers, if you put it horizontally, we think of it as a number line going infinitely to the left or to the right, A through G sharp, and then repeating left to the right, or 1, 1.5 up to 7, and then repeating infinitely left, infinitely to the right. Or you think of it as a circle. You put it around in a circle, but as I go into a circle, you lose the dimension of octave. But that's how we have to think about it basically as human beings. So we have to know which way is the best way to do it. So for our engine, I think this is the tightest kind of construction we can make. Now I'm going to assign some letters to it. Ionian is going to be an I. Ionian Ocean, I'm going to call it I sharp. I'm not going to give it a Dorian flat. You can name it Dorian flat if you want, but then you get into that double naming territory. I don't think that's productive with this situation. So I'm always going to name the ocean to the right of the continent. Also, I'm going to start using this analogy when I look at relative perspective, and that is going to be that the notes are like the stars in heaven, like they don't move. That's like a fretboard. And then the modes are going to be my relative perspective, which act kind of like the continent under the fretboard. So they actually move under your fingers. So in other words, if I have my finger on an A, then that A might be an Aeolian at 4 o'clock, but then I might change my perspective, keep my finger on the star of A, but then visualize it being at 3 o'clock, right? Or meaning visualize it as a Phrygian, which changes the pattern, not just on a guitar, but any kind of instrument, but I tend to visualize a guitar. All right, so then we have 2 as Dorian, and then we have Dorian sharp is 2.5. We have 3 is going to be Phrygian. We have 4 is going to be Lydian, which I'm going to use a Y instead of an L because an L looks like a 1. So Lydian, L-Y. And then we have Lydian Ocean, Y sharp. And then we have 5, Mixolydian. I'm going to use an X instead of an M because an M looks like major minor. And then I'm going to say Mixolydian Ocean, X sharp. And then A, I'm going to use A, which looks like the letter A, but the D and the A could get confusing. But lowercase is usually going to be in the context of a mode. And then Aeolian Ocean. And then 7, I'm going to use an N because I don't want to use an L. And because Locrian's kind of crazy, I'm going to use it, think of it as spelled backwards. The last letter is an N in Locrian. Okay, so then I have the notes that are going to be pulled in here. So I'm going to start on the outside with the numbering system, which is generally 1 through 12. So this is going to be 1 equals the one above it plus 1. So 1, 2, 3, down to 12. However, this starting point is going to change. That's going to be our engine. This is the thing that's kind of driving the engine. So I'll make that like, I don't know. Let's make it our data input blue for now. So that's going to be driving the data input. I think I was using a sharper blue for, well, let's keep it at that. And so if I make this like a 4, which would be note C, then what happens? I have a problem because this went up to 15. I can't go to 15. It can only go up to 12. So how can I fix that? I could just do a little bit more complicated formula. I'm going to double click in here and say, this would be great if it doesn't go over 12. But if it does, this is a basic like if-then logic. Looks kind of long, but once you get used to it, not too bad. I could say if tab, and then I'm going to copy the condition. That's the general condition. If that plus that is less than 13. Now, these are always going to be whole numbers, so that means it could go up through 12. So I don't have to say if it's, I could say up through, if it's less than 13, then it'll be under 12, right? Up to 12. And then I could say if it's that, then, comma, so then, comma, what I want you to do that. I just pasted the same thing. Then just do that. But if not, comma, then I want you to do the same thing, but then subtract 12 because it's going to be above 13. So in other words, this one, 13, 14, and 15 are going to be above or 12. So therefore, I want you to take these 3 and subtract 12, and then we should be good. So I'm gonna close that up. I'm gonna copy that down. So it looks like it does what I would expect, right? So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then it goes back to 1, 2, 3. If I change this 4 to like a 6, then it looks like it's doing what we expect. If I double click on this, notice you could like do this a little bit, like you can kind of reverse the logic if you want to. So I said if this is less than 13, you could say, well, if it was greater than 12, then do this minus 12. If not, do the other one, right? I could reverse the logic test. So sometimes that's useful. I tend to put the logic test kind of this way. So some people have different preferences on that, but it's basically just a logic test. Okay, so now that I have this, so this represents the notes now. So now what I'd like to do is pull in the letters. So what I can do is say, okay, I have over here my notes and my letters, meaning these are equivalent, you will recall, to our accounting system of the accounts. And these are like the numbers. So over here, what I have are the account numbers. I want to pull in like the account names. So because I have this table over here, I could just use an XLOOKUP to do that. So classic XLOOKUP table. So it's going to be equals XLOOKUP tab. All right. So I want to say lookup value. I'm going to grab this one. So I'm grabbing J2, comma, lookup array. Find that number in this array. Now I'm going to select F4 on the keyboard. That puts a $sign on the whole array before the C, the 2, colon, before the C and the 13. So that whole array should not move when I copy it down, and then comma, and then the return array, I want you to return to me this array, those letters. So then I'm going to select F4, put in a $sign before all of the letters and numbers, and that should be good. Now, sometimes on these, like you might want a comma, and then if it's not found, oftentimes I want to leave it blank, double quote. Shouldn't need that here though, because it should be found. So I'm going to delete that. And if it's not found, it'll give me an error, which will help me to determine something is wrong. So let's enter. And if I copy that down, so there we have it. So now that's kind of our engine, right? So if I make this a 1, there's my collection from the perspective of the Ionian. A is Ionian, B is the Dorian, C sharp, D flat is the Phrygian, D is the Lydian. At 2, that means A sharp or B flat is the Ionian. B is the Ionian Ocean, C is the Dorian. If I'm at 3, then B is the Ionian, because, right, it's just applying the formula, because the formula is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 and then another half would bring me back home. So this is just saying, I'm going to keep this still, I'm going to keep this part the same, and then rotate this part around to whatever I want, which gives me my relative perspective engine to see what collection of notes I'm going to be generating from it, right? From the Ionian's perspective. Then the other perspective is modal point. So there's 2, what I would think of as like dials in our traditional music system. One is what collection, what relative perspective are you using? So that's going to be, there's 12 7-note collections. Now you can think of it, they're not really 7-note collections, they're 12-note collections, but they're looking at it from the perspective of like 7 notes in, 5 out of the collection. So we're just naming everything from that relative perspective. Now you might say, well, look, there's way more scales than that. We've got pentatonic scales and we've got blah, 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 blah. Yeah, but they're all variations of the same thing, meaning the pentatonic scale is generally going to take the 7-note scale and remove 2 notes from the 7-note scale. So you're still looking at it from the perspective of these same nodal point positions. You might add a note to it and warp the scale. Okay, well, that still means that you're looking at it from a 7-note scale and then you're warping something. You have to have a baseline in order to warp it in your mind. So instead of memorizing a whole huge table of scales, I think most musicians come to the realization that it's a lot more efficient to say, well, really, we're kind of looking at everything in Western music typically from a 7-note collection, which I can then modify. So then I visualize the 7-note collection and then I modify it, right? Right. That would be you would think that would be the logical way to go. Okay. So now notice that it would be nice for me to have a color system. I'm going to make this 4 that is in relative position, because that means that when I look at my DAW and I write music, I can always write the music from the perspective of these nodal points. So it might be useful to apply a color system that is just based on these nodal points. By the way, the other knob I was talking about is the center, meaning if I'm at 4 o'clock, collection of notes around the key of C, maybe I'm not looking at it from the Ionian perspective. Maybe I'm looking at it from the Dorian's perspective, meaning that's the tonic. So that's fine, because then what I would suggest then is we don't need to renumber the system to make that the 1. We just say, okay, now the Dorian is the tonic. Same numbering system, same nodal names, but I'm just going to visualize the Dorian as the tonic. People will argue with that, but I would think that is the most efficient system if you were going to rework things from scratch. Okay, so let's apply the color coding. Now the color coding would be easiest to imagine like if we start on C, meaning I kind of like the tonic being this green, which happens to be the C and the colors we applied over here. So why don't we just take these colors as they would be the case if we were looking at it from the key of C, because that's probably the most common keys that we work in oftentimes, and then use that as the standard color system for the modal points. So in other words, I'm going to have one color system for all 12 collections of 7 notes. In the accounting system over here, that would be similar to us having like a color system that was for basic account types, assets, liability, equity, and expense, versus more detailed account types, meaning assets, current assets, fixed assets, long-term assets, current liabilities, long-term liabilities, and so on. So that's going to be the idea. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take these colors and apply them out to the ones that are in the collection. Now, again, if you were in a database program like a QuickBooks over here, then that would be quite useful, because I would think you would have a toggle up top that you can just turn the color on and off. A lot of database programs don't have that in accounting or in the music kind of software. That's very, it should just be standardized, right? Because then it would be an easy toggle, as opposed to like, well, what color do you want to use? And we could, right, you can come up with a standardized color and just flip it on and off for two different visualizations. One either being the notes as static, or two being by relative perspective, the nodal points. Okay, so I'm going to grab this one and I'm just going to select. Then I could do it by the number system, or I could do it by these over here. So I'm going to do them both. I'm going to select all the numbers. I'm going to go through this tedious process and say, let's not do equal. I'm going to say if it contains. So I'm going to say if it contains this number 1, then hit the drop down. I want you to, no, I'm going to have to do equals. I'm going to have to do equals. I'm going to say if it equals that 1, then custom, and we go to the fill, and I'm going to go more colors, custom colors. I'm going to make it that one. Boom. Now that means that I can only have one thing in the cell to kind of apply this conditional formatting, but that's fine. And then I'm going to say the 2 is going to be the D in at the, so I'm going to copy this one, select this whole thing, drop it down. If it equals this 2, I'm skipping the ones that are in the ocean because I'm not going to give them their unique color. I'm only going to color the ones that are within the collection. Therefore, the ones outside the collection will be defined by not having a color. So this one's going to be boom. And so now I'm going to go hit the drop down and say equal to that node, drop down, custom, color, custom, boom, paste, bam. And then this is going to be this one, copy, select, drop down. This is going to be equal to the 4, drop down. We're going to say more colors, custom, boom. That's it. Okay. And then the Mixolydian is a G at the collection notes around the key of C. So we'll copy that. Select these, custom, equal to the 5, drop down, custom, more, custom, boom. Okay. And then 6 is Aeolian up here. Wait a sec. Yeah, 1 is Aeolian. So we'll pick the Aeolian. And we'll say equal to the 6, drop down, format, Now I know this is tedious, but once we have them encoded, then we can use them. So I'm going to copy then the B finally, and then hit the drop down and say equal to 7. Boom. Now, right now, we have the same colors for all the letters, right? So C is this green. We have the D over here is that green. The E is that blue. The F is that blue. But if I change the colors on this, if I change the collection to like 11 o'clock, right? Now the G is that green. See? So now this relative perspective is looking at all 12 collections from the standpoint of what's the functionality of each of the notes from that collection's perspective, which is a lot more useful musically, typically, although, and we haven't really evolved to think that way because in part the piano has different fingering whenever you change the collection, but no other instrument does. And even the piano wouldn't be visual. So anyways, so then let's do the same thing for the letters over here. So I'll go back to C just so I can see it most easily, and I'll copy this one. And this time I can, well, I could use contains. Can I use contains? No, it'd have to be equal to again. So let's say it's really going to be let's just choose the ones that are in the collection. This is going to get tedious because the hashtag ones are oftentimes not going to be in our system later. So I'll just choose the ones in the collection, and I'm going to say it contains. If it contains an I, then I hit the drop down, boom, 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 and then this one, okay, okay, okay. And then I'm on this one, and I'm holding down Control just to select the ones that are in the collection, which is kind of tedious. Drop down. If it contains that D, drop down, The reason I want to say contains is because maybe I want to combine it with something else in a cell so that it'll still pick up the color even if it has something else in there, like the letter and that letter, or a different number and that letter or something. So then we're going to say this one here, I'll copy that, and then I'm just going to hold down Control, select the ones in the collection. Conditional formatting contains the P, drop down, conditional formatting, more, custom, boom, okay, okay, okay. And then we'll grab this one, and then I'll hold down Control to select the ones in the collection only. Conditional formatting contains the Y, drop down, custom, okay, and boom, 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 boom. And then the X is Mixolydian. It's going to be this pink. Holding down Control to select only the ones in the collection. Drop down. If it contains that X, drop down, paste, and then Aeolian is up here. Copy, holding down Control, selecting the ones in the collection only. Drop down. If it contains that A, and then more colors, custom, paste, okay, okay, okay. One more time, and that's going to be this one on the B. Holding down Control, so I have just the ones in the collection. Conditional formatting, if it contains that N, drop down, custom, more, Okay, so now, again, they all look the same here, but if I change it to 6 o'clock, now the D has this green, right? If I change it to 8 o'clock, now that E is this green because it is the Ionian. So this color system is the same as this color system if we're looking at it from the perspective of 4 o'clock. But if I'm looking at it, what I call 4 o'clock, meaning the collection of notes around the key of C. But if we're looking at it from any other perspective, then this color system is going to be different because it's going to be absolute based on Ionian is that green, Dorian is that green, Phrygian is that blue, Lydian is that blue, Mixolydian is that pink, and so on. So now if I encode this somewhere else, like if I had an I, and then I also want to encode like a 6, which stands for the Dorian in our numbering system. So now I have the D, or the 6 stands for the note letter, and the I stands for the Ionian node. I should still be able to pull this color over here, right? That's why I want to do a conditional formatting. Or if this was a Y, now that's going to change the color automatically. I should be able to clear the color, and by just clearing the rule. Okay, so that's going to be our engine. This engine, it takes a long time to kind of mull over this engine. But if you get that, you actually get the heart of really the music changes, the two kind of dials that you change our collections on. And you probably get it better than a lot of musicians because they're kind of hamstrung from the start because of the piano altering the standard teaching methodology to kind of overcomplicate transitions between all 12 collections of 7 notes, because the black keys are different shapes and sizes as opposed to most other instruments, including a guitar, which is symmetrical, and therefore this construction will probably be more natural to you there. But either way, it's worth learning no matter what instrument you're on, I feel like. But in any case, it's also going to be an instrument that we can apply to the DAW. If you don't know music at all, then this perspective would almost certainly be a better method for people that are just trying to put together beats and stuff that they think sound good, because all they have to do is have a relative perspective, which always has the same relative perspective. We can visualize that as a similar thing again over here to the accounting system, where we have the relative perspective of these accounts closing out, which we can see in a database program over here, for example, because I can look at, for example, last year, let's say 2025. Let's go 2025 through 2026, and then say that I want to see year by year breakout. So now I've got 2025 and 2026. Let's go through 2027. There's no data. So here's 2026, right? So now I have net income down here. See that net income is in a different area. And then in 2026, it's still there, but it closed out to the retained earnings. You can see that in the profit and loss by saying that net income is right here, 1,642. Here's the 1,642. Now it closed out over here. And in the profit and loss, you can see that by saying, let's move this up to next year, or let's just do a side by side here, 2027, drop it down, look at it in years. So now you could see 2027 doesn't have anything in it because it hasn't been closed out. So once I close out 2026, the temporary account has nothing in it. And then on the trial balance, you can see that because if I look at 2026, here it is, and the income statement is down here on one report. So we're down here on sales, services. Here's the equity section. So if I change this to go to 2027, let's go to 010127, 123127, there's no income statement. Everything got closed out into retained earnings. So the reason I say that is because the totals are the same still under the two. So it's kind of like we changed the perspective. It's a similar kind of thing. We have the same total dollar amounts being represented, but we're looking at the perspective differently because we changed the timing accounts, which are the temporary accounts in accounting, so that they closed out based on the time. So in a sense, this isn't so much a filtering report, even though we've lost a lot of accounts, in the sense that the numbers are all still represented in dollars. It's more like that third type of report, which is kind of like all the numbers are still there, but we're looking at it from a different perspective time-wise. So in our Excel, in our music thing, what's happening is is that this engine is going to give us the same 12 notes, but I'm looking at it from a relative perspective based on kind of like the planet is shifting around under the stars. So now the planet, all of the notes are the same, but but I have a different perspective of them as the planet rotates under the stars, which we'll look at as an analogy further in the future.